Welcome to this week's edition of Draft YouTube. Yeah, we got the outside linebacker rankings today. I'll give you guys an update on the College Cup and the MLS Playoffs conference finals today. Joey is still in the running to win his $40 bet, and and the WNBA mock draft I promised you guys on Wednesday. And for anybody who missed Wednesday's show, Orton was out for Utopia Football Insider, so Joey and William filled in, and all the predictions for all the NFL games are on that episode. Just go to the Utopia Football Insider playlist on the Draft Utopia YouTube channel, or you can go to the latest videos or live streams on the Draft Utopia YouTube channel. It's there. My predictions, Williams, Joey's, everything's there. And that crunching noise in the background is me eating the toast I did not finish for breakfast. I finished my eggs. I finished my squash casserole. I did not finish my toast. But with that being said, we're going to get into the outside linebacker rankings. Number one player on this list is Tennessee pass rusher James Pierce Jr. He is the only outside linebacker I have a first round grade on. He sacks like a 43 defensive end. He has the body and size of an outside linebacker. It's got to improve his run stuffing and coverage. Those were the big knocks on him heading into the year. I don't know if he has improved his run stuffing and coverage enough to warrant a top 10 or top 5 pick, but I do have James Pierce at number 27 on the board here. And I know it's kind of hard to see my face, but, that's part of the lighting and the resolution, the background. That's not something I can control, but you'll see my face a lot clearer at the apartment next week. So James Pierce Jr. is probably my only first round outside linebacker. I do have him at 27 on the board. Floor 79 out of 99, ceiling 95 out of 99. So he's got one of the higher ceilings in the draft, but he might take 2 to 3 years to develop. Could take 4 years to develop, but he's one of these players that is one of the better players in the draft if you can develop them, because they got the sacking down. They got the pass rushing down. You just got to fix the run stuffing and coverage, and you got yourself a superstar at outside linebacker in the 34 defense. I put him in outside linebacker only because he's under 250 pounds, but he could easily get up to 250 by the combine. That's the thing. That's the caveat. If we were grading players just based on potential, not floor, but ceiling and potential, top five would be Travis Hunter, Will Campbell, Will Johnson, Ole Gordon, and Pierce would come in at number five. We were just grading on potential alone, not where they are now in their development, but just on their long term ceilings. He'd be number five for me. Pierce would. Yeah, and last year, James Pierce Jr. had 14 and a half tackles for a loss, 10 sacks, and 16 quarterback hurries with the Tennessee Volunteers. That's what he did last year. This year, he is at 11 tackles for a loss, 10 quarterback hurries, 7.5 sacks. So if he can get to 10 sacks, the consistency will be there on tape. Won't be as dominant as last year, but the consistency will be there. He's got a game against Vanderbilt, and assuming Tennessee wins that, they're probably going to have a road game in the college football playoff. Maybe if Georgia beats Texas or Texas A&M in the SEC title, Tennessee will get the 8 seed and they'll get a home game, and Pierce could go off in that game. So I do think there's a chance. I'd say the two outside linebackers with the best chance of reaching 10 sacks are James Pierce Jr. and Penn State's Abdul Carter, who we'll get to a little later. I do have a third on Carter, but there's a lot of people hyping up Carter right now. But Pierce Jr. is still my number one outside linebacker at this juncture, Joey. And he's probably yours, I can tell, just based on the praise you showed for me. He's probably your number one outside linebacker as well at this point. 6'5", 243. Just a lot's there, not just in terms of potential, but in terms of consistency. He's consistently getting tackled for loss, consistently hurrying the quarterback. A lot's there from a pass rushing standpoint. The run stuffing and coverage, you still want that to develop and improve, but a lot's there from a pass rushing standpoint. And Jihad Campbell, he's 27th on my board because I think his floor is a little bit lower than most. Needs to improve his run stuffing and coverage, but he's the most consistent pass rusher in this draft. You could argue that because He's had 2 seasons with 10 or more tackles for a loss. He's had 2 or more seasons with 10 quarterback hurries. He's at 7.5 sacks. He could easily get to 10 sacks. He's got Vanderbilt. He's going to have a game in the college football playoff, assuming Tennessee doesn't lose to Vanderbilt today. So the odds say he should approach 10.5 sacks. I'm not sure he'll get there, but the odds indicate he should get there. Pittsburgh. Because what I'm thinking Pittsburgh's going to do, they've already re-signed Hayward, TJ Watt's in a contract year. I could see them buying out Alex Highsmith and drafting Pierce to replace him. Because then Pierce would be on a rookie deal. You wouldn't have to worry about your edge rusher situation. And you could pay whatever Watt wants to keep him in Pittsburgh. Because he got like a $30 million deal for 2 or 3 years. And he's entering the final year of that next season. I don't want to cut Highsmith either, but he's only in 1 season with 10 sacks, and you got all these contracts you got to deal with. Hayward, you extended him. You're going to have to extend Watt. That's going to put you over the. You got to pay Wilson. Someone's got to go, and unfortunately, I think Highsmith's the odd man out in Pittsburgh. I mean, he's 27. He still has value. Highsmith only has 3 sacks this year, and he's missed multiple weeks with injuries. Highsmith, he's missed multiple games with injuries this week, and he only has 3 sacks on the year. And when you look at Highsmith's contract, I'll quickly get into this, and then we'll get into Jihad Campbell, my number 2 outside linebacker, who had a really good game against Will Campbell earlier in the season a few weeks ago. But Highsmith's under contract till 2028. But Pittsburgh front loaded his contract so they could get out of it in 2025 because it's a team friendly contract. Pittsburgh would actually save 1.3 million if they bought him out this year. They would save nearly $8 million, 7.8 million if they cut him in 2026. So maybe they draft Highsmith, they develop him for a year behind Watt and Highsmith, and then they cut Highsmith in 2026 to save more cap space. But they could cut him now, but they'd only save 1.3 million compared to 7.8 in 2026, and they'd save over 12 million in 2027 if they kept him that long. But I'm thinking just in terms of projections, they will probably trade him to another team that's willing to take on his salary or cut him in 2026. Just looking at the estimates and projections, if they're only going to save 1.3 million, why cut him now? Why cut him now when he's still young, Joe? You know, it just doesn't make a lot of sense financially to do that. Plus, Joey Porter Jr. is going to enter year 3 of his rookie deal next season, and he'll be eligible for an extension in 2026. So he continues to perform well. You will need that money in 2026 to extend Porter Jr. I think that's what's going to happen. They'll cut Highsmith to extend Porter Jr. That would be my take on that situation. And I think that's the most realistic scenario. You've already paid Hayward. You need to Watt. You need to pay Wilson. I don't know what the salary cap looks like for Pittsburgh in 2026, but I want to see where Pierce is mocked on Tankathon really quickly before I get into the salary cap for Pittsburgh, because we do got to move on to Pierce. I don't see they have Pierce to the Colts at 13 Tankathon. So Pierce is weird because in terms of his ceiling, he's got a top 5 ceiling. But in terms of his floor, I think his floor is lower than most. That's why I have him at 27. But again, you look at I just want to look at the Steelers' cap space for 2025 really quickly. And we'll get into Jihad Campbell. They are projected around $68 million. So the Steelers have $68 million. They're probably going to spend that on Watt first. I know there's a lot of blogs saying they're going to go after free agents. Steelers are not like that. They retain the talent that's been impactful to their team, and then they use the draft to stash players and rookie deals and then pay those players at the right time. They might get 1 or 2 free agents, but they're not going to overpay for a free agent. Like, that's what I'm trying to get at. They're probably going to use $30 million on Watt, and they're going to probably use another $30 million on Russell Wilson, if I had to guess. That's probably what they're going to do with the $68 million, and then they'll use the rest of their cap space to address the draft. I would think that would be how they would handle this. And TJ Watt's salary, if TJ Watt gets extended, his salary would affect the Steelers' cap space in 2026 versus 2025. So the Steelers have $57 million according to Spot Track for 2025, and in 2026, what do the Steelers have for 2026? That's what I'm looking at, because if they put the franchise tag on Russell Wilson, they could keep him for another year. It would cost $42 million, and then they could just use the remaining $15 million to build through the draft. That's kind of what, because I think they'll cut Highsmith to pay Porter Jr. if Porter Jr. keeps balling out for the Steelers. I think that's ultimately the direction the organization will take, because that just makes the Steelers have $203 million for 2026, and $30 million of that's going to go to TJ Watt, at least $30 million, maybe more. So the Steelers have $203 million for 2026 when TJ Watt becomes a UFA. A chunk of that's going to go to TJ Watt, Joey. We both know that. We both know a chunk of that $203 million for 2026 is going to Watt. But I'm not going to continue this Steeler rant. We got 9 more outside linebackers to break down. I'm going to break down Jihad Campbell of Alabama next. He's number 2 in my rankings. And I have Jihad Campbell on my board in the second round. I have Jihad Campbell listed at 49 on my big board. Floor of 75, ceiling of 85. He's going to reach his ceiling, but he may have the ceiling of a borderline starter rather than a high-end starter or a Pro Bowl or an All-Pro. Alabama's had a great record with outside linebackers, but I think Campbell's floor is slightly lower than some of the previous linebackers Alabama's had. But he's had a really good season at Alabama. 51 solo tackles, 46 assisted, 97 total tackles, 10.5 tackles for a loss, 5 sacks, 0 quarterback hurries, 2 deflections from pass breakups, 2 forced fumbles, 1 interception at 6'3", 244. And he had that big game against Will Campbell where he managed to sack Nussmeier twice. And Will Campbell's still my number 1 prospect, but he has given up 11 quarterback hurries this year, which is the most he's given up in his 3 years at LSU. So has only given up 1 sack, only given up 3 sacks, but he's given up 11 quarterback hurries in addition to those 3 sacks. So that's something you got to take into consideration as well with Will Campbell. But let's talk about Jihad Campbell. I don't think Jihad Campbell's ceiling is as high as the consensus, but he had a good game against Will Campbell. Alabama's got a factory when it comes to outside linebackers, so there's a possibility Campbell gets overdrafted as a result. I mean, he has a high floor, but I think his ceiling's really limited. Because I got an 85 on him. That's the grade I gave Mac Jones and Kenny Pickett for potential when they were drafted. I have the same grade on Jihad Campbell, but he's getting first round consideration. My friend Clint, who's a Falcons fan, has him at 21 on his board now, which I think is a little too high for my blood. But you know, Jihad Campbell's gaining traction right now. No, both of his sacks came against the left tackle, Will Campbell. Both of Jihad Campbell's sacks came against the left tackle. No worries. I like Garrett Dillinger at left guard, but I have him as a backup left guard in the NFL, and I have like a sixth or seventh on him. There's some people that have Dellinger in the third or fourth, which is nuts. I don't agree with that. But as far as Jihad Campbell goes, I think he's the number two outside linebacker. I think Jihad Campbell's the number two outside linebacker at this point. That could change after the combine because the next two guys on my list are Harold Perkins Jr. and Abdul Carter. I've got Perkins at three and Carter at four. I think those two are rawer. Those two are rawer than Jihad Campbell, but they have higher ceilings. So that's what's tricky about this as far as the assessments for the draft goes. And I have Perkins graded slightly higher than Carter. I have Perkins at number 58 on my big board, floor of 72, ceiling of 92. Has the athletic traits you covet, but isn't really consistent as far as being a sack artist goes. So we're talking about Perkins. We're not talking about Carter yet, but we're talking about Perkins. We will bring up Carter though. Barrett Carter is 97 on my board. He's number five. He's number five on my board. Number four is Abdul Carter, and number three is a Perkins, LSU. But we're going to talk about. It's interesting because you said you love Perkins, but what happened with Perkins is he had two seasons at LSU where he did a great job, 2 seasons of 7.5 sacks, and then he tore his ACL in August. So that's sort of why he's no longer in the first round. But there were a lot of people at the beginning of the year that had Harold Perkins in the top five of their mock drafts. If you remember, there were people that had Perkins at number one. I think Walter Football and Charlie had Perkins at number one or number two before he tore his ACL. So there is a lot of traction for Perkins. And if he has a good combine, he shows he's healthy, he could move up the board. But I currently have him at 57. And that's because of the injury that kept him out of the season. He got injured in week three. So that's really see him this year. So it's one of these guys who's going to have to dominate the pre-draft process in order to. I think Perkins' ceiling is floor and ceiling is the best after Jihad Campbell, but there's no guarantee he reaches his ceiling because if your floor is 72 and your ceiling's 92, it could take up to 4 years to reach that ceiling. Even though it's a very high ceiling, it could take, you got to go to the right team and develop properly and have the facilities, the coaching staff with you. Yeah, I think I had a 98 on Nick Chubb and a 99 on Saquon Barkley for potential in their draft years. And Nick Chubb now has a 96 on Madden, which is the second highest Madden rating behind McCaffrey. So, yeah, this is not a blue chip player like Chubb was, but this is just a play. This is just another guy who could be a high end starter, could be a Pro Bowler on the right team, but we'll see what happens with him. I got Perkins at 58, one spot ahead of Dante Corleone. I am 30 to 4. I am 45% sure that Harold Perkins could be a high end starter in the right team, and I'm 30% sure he's going to be a Pro Bowler or a star player. 30. That's not a player you pound the table for. I have him at 58 for a reason. I think that's a fair number. There's people that have him in round three. I had him in round three at the beginning of the year. I moved him up to round two. I think that's a fair spot to put him in. I mean, it's kind of harsh, but that's the reality, Joey. Um, you want to add anything to that, or I'm going to get to Abdul Carter unless you want to add something to that. I've got Abdul Carter, the Penn State outside linebacker, at 68 on my board. He is my top third round outside linebacker. He's lined up at edge rusher this year. He has 8 sacks. Can he get to 10 sacks? And he's because there are people that love Abdul Carter to the point where they have Carter in their top five. I don't think his ceiling is as high as Pierce's, but he's gonna. They think he's gonna test well at the combine. They think he's gonna get 10 sacks. And to be fair, Penn State, he's at 8 sacks right now. He's gonna have at least one home playoff game in Happy Valley, and Penn State does host Maryland today to end the regular season. So those two games are gonna be opportunities for Carter to try to work his way into the first round because he's at 68 on my board. He could move up. He could be the riser of this group at outside linebacker. He missed a lot of tackles versus Ohio State in 2023, and I'm still not sure if he's cleaned that up. That's my only objection with Carter. If I can see that he's cleaned that up from his 2024 tape, he dominates the combine, he finishes with 10 sacks. I have zero issue with moving him into the first round. I just haven't seen that at this point in the draft process yet. And it's not a no, it's an objection. That's the difference. It's not a clear cut no, it's an objection. It's I want to see this, and if I see this, I'll move you up. It's that simple. There are people that think Abdul Carter's gonna run a 4.44. That's why Dane Brugler has Abdul Carter at number 3 on his big board. Yeah, that's what's the thing with Nolan Smith was in the same position. Nolan Smith in the Eagles. He was in the same position Carter's in right now. Sort of viewed as a second, third round pick at this time, but he dominated the combine, ran a 4.47, and the Eagles took him at 31, I believe. Yeah, because this year the Eagles were supposed to start Bryce Huff and Brandon Graham, but Bryce Huff goes on IR. Brandon Graham is a season-ending injury, and by week 4, Nolan Smith took the left outside linebacker job across from Josh Sweat from both Bryce Huff and Brandon Graham. They were relegated to backup roles, and Josh Sweat is a UFA after this year. If you paid attention to Wes's mock draft, so Nolan Smith would have a much bigger role in year 3 compared to what he's done in year 2 because of the Eagles. Howie Roseman might choose not to pay Josh Sweat. Yeah, yeah, you're right on that. Number 5 is not Barrett Carter. There's one more guy ahead of Barrett Carter on my list. That is Iowa's Nick Jackson. Nick Jackson, the right outside linebacker in Iowa, came in at number 5. I think his floor is higher than Barrett Carter's, but his ceiling is lower. I've got a 70 for floor on Jackson and a 90 on ceiling for Iowa right outside linebacker Nick Jackson. Nick Jackson is strictly a 43 right outside linebacker. Harold Perkins, 34, 43 left outside linebacker. Carter is probably the most versatile player outside of Pierce. So, and then you've got Martin. Nick Jackson's mainly a right outside linebacker. Nick Jackson, he's mainly a right outside linebacker on in a 43 scheme, but I think his floor is slightly higher than Barrett Carter's. And I have, yeah, yeah. And we'll mention his teammate Jay Higgins next week when we break down the middle linebackers. I've only got 10 of those, but I do have Nick Jackson ahead of Jay Higgins. So Joey might disagree with me on that take, but we'll have to tune in next week. That's what I'm saying. I think Higgins is going to be stuck in the inside. I have Higgins at 108 on my board, and I have Nick Jackson at 94. And most mocks have Higgins ahead of Jackson, but Higgins missed a lot of tackles last year when watching the tape for these guys in the summer. Oh, great. My dog just grabbed a knife from the dishwasher, and she's running around with the knife in her mouth like she's Jack Sparrow. Fantastic. That might be right. She might just want some leftover turkey. That's a valid point, Joey. But anyway, we'll get to Barrett Carter, who's number 6. I've got a floor of 69 of 99, ceiling of 94. So outside of Barrett Carter has the highest potential outside of James Pierce, but he also has one of the lower floors. And anything below a 70 for a floor, that's a boomer bust type player that you're looking at. But even if Carter doesn't become a Pro Bowl outside linebacker, he doesn't reach that massive ceiling. if he develops correctly for 3 years, he could be a starter in 3 years from now. If he develops correctly, he could be a high end starter in 3 years. Yeah, he got carved and man gave a touchdown on one play. Yeah, he's a project. I have him at 97 on my board, which is where the third round comp picks get drafted. So yeah. And then at 109, my final starting, he gave up a touchdown playing man coverage, though. That's the thing. Like, he can be a liability in man coverage. That's the thing, though. And if his 40 times bad, teams might look at him and say he is a backup outside linebacker. And they might pigeonhole him into that, and then he won't get a chance to start unless he proves himself as a backup, which kind of sucks because I think he's good enough to play. Yeah, yes. So next, good thought process. Next up, the final linebacker with a starter grade 109 on my big board is Jason Henderson of Old Dominion. I've got a floor of 61, ceiling of 91. He might be more of a high end backup, but after Barrett Carter at 6, you have Jason Henderson at 7, and then the drop off in talent begins. For Joey, the drop off might be after Barrett Carter, but if you're looking for an outside linebacker who could be a eventual starter on day 3, Jason Henderson out of Old Dominion is probably your best bet. Because if you can't get him, you're stuck with a backup. You're stuck with having to settle for a backup guy. So that's the thing. I do have hit Jason Henderson because Henderson can tackle well, but he's decent in coverage, but he's not consistent in coverage. And that's the thing he's got to clean up leading into the draft. And he does miss a few tackles. but he also gets a lot of tackles too, and he can rush the QB. I'd like to see him stop the run a little bit more, but he's a good player. I have him at 109, group of five player. He's the top group of five outside linebacker in the draft. Um, you want to talk about Henderson, or should I just get to my next guy on the list? Because the next guy after Henderson's 151 on my board. Next guy on my board is Jalen Walker. I have him at 151. There are 150 players with starter potential grades. Walker is the first player with a backup grade among this group, and he was a finalist for the Butkus Award. So, and there's a lot of people that think I'm too low on Jalen Walker, the Georgia right outside linebacker, but I think he's an NFL backup. That's just me, but I understand why people feel like he could be a starter. But for me, Jalen Walker out of Georgia is the backup at the next level. Yeah. Yeah, it's like if anybody took Walker in the first round, I'd probably give them an F grade, but you'd probably give him a C minus or a D plus because even though you're skeptical, yeah, but he's still a scrub compared to Aiden Hutchinson, Sauce Gardner. That's yeah, yeah, yeah. And I had Aiden Hutchinson as the number one player in that draft, as did most. And I had Stingley and Sauce Gardner. I had max potential grades on too, but they went 3 and 4, which surprised me. I figured, yeah, Hutchinson and Gardner would probably be 1 and 2 in a redraft, though, for that. But let's get to the next guy on the list, Colin Oliver out of Oklahoma State. I have a sixth-round grade in Colin Oliver, and after the 52-0 loss to Colorado yesterday, Colin Oliver might be in undrafted territory. So I think the earliest Oliver goes is the sixth round, but there is a possibility he goes undrafted after the 52-0 loss to Colorado yesterday. I'm not. Oklahoma's 3-9. They're not going to a bowl game. Oklahoma State's 3-9. They're not going to a bowl game. And I have Nick Martin, the middle linebacker in Oklahoma State, at 93. He's my number 2 middle linebacker. I have got him ahead of Lawson. Lawson had a season-ending injury. That's the only reason I have him and Lawson tied. But I gave the tiebreaker to Martin because he's been healthier. But Lawson's probably going to be a better pro than Martin. But I have for next week, I've got Stutzman at number 1 for the middle linebackers, and he's my only second-round middle linebacker. And then I've got 2 third-round linebackers. It's not a great middle linebacker draft, but wrapping up the outside linebacker group is Mohamed Torre out of Rutgers, and I have a 7th on him. So, yeah. He went for Utah. He didn't go to Wisconsin. He went to Utah. I was at the East-West Shrine Bowl. One's in the Midwest and the other's in the Southwest. They're states. Yes, yes. One has a W and the other has a U on it, and it's got like a feather on the helmet, like the old Redskins helmet. Yeah, bingo. Scout the player, not the helmet. I'm kidding. Yeah, I felt like Tabati was nothing more than a backup, a pure outside linebacker, and if you don't play him an outside linebacker, you're going to get nothing out of him. I like the Jordan Hicks signing, but I figured without Hicks, the Browns are one-dimensional. They can't stop the run without Hicks. Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, that makes sense. Yep. I'm going to get you guys an update. I will get to the WNBA mock in a second, but I'm going to get an update on the College Cup and the MLS playoffs first. Get the soccer stuff out of the way. But there's some soccer games on today. If you're not interested in hearing Joey and I talk about Michigan, Ohio State, there are some games on today for college soccer. So I'm going to get into the brackets here really quickly here and break this down as quickly as possible. I'm going to start with today's games, and I'm going to go in the order of the games that are being played today. First game that's going to be played today is in the bottom left region at 2 p.m. It's going to be the Marshall Thundering Herd hosting North Carolina State. North Carolina State, they pulled off a huge upset. They beat Charlotte in double overtime in the round of 48, but they knocked off number 4 Georgetown 2-0, and they're going to be traveling to Marshall in West Virginia to take on number 13 Marshall. Marshall was the number 1 seed last year. They lost to Stanford in the Sweet 16. They've got Linker Rodriguez dos Santos, very long last name, Rodrigo dos Santos. He has 12 goals for Marshall. He's sort of stepped up with Matthew Bell now in the MLS. I just think Marshall's too experienced. They Marshall lost in the round of 32 to Virginia in 22. They lost in the Sweet 16. They've got to at least get to the Elite Eight. I mean, they won a championship in 2020, but they haven't really. They had a miraculous 2020 season. Marshall had a miraculous 2020 season. They beat number 1 Clemson. They beat defending champion Georgetown, and then they beat North Carolina and Indiana to win it all as underdogs in 2020 during the COVID year. And it's a great underdog story, but they haven't recaptured that glory as a college soccer program since then. It's been 5 years, 4 or 5 years since that championship season, which took place in 2021 due to COVID. So I think Marshall wins this game at home. They're more experienced, and I think they get back to the Elite Eight for next week. So I am going to take Marshall. Yeah, but we're not talking about Stanford yet. We're talking about Marshall and North Carolina State. I like Marshall. Rodriguez dos Santos. Yes. Yeah. Linker Rodriguez dos Santos. That's the best player on Marshall. He's a senior. He's got 4 names, 3 last names, 1 middle name. And if you count them, 1 first name, 1 middle name, 3 last names. Linker Rodriguez dos Santos, 12 goals for Marshall. But yeah, I mean, yeah, because I haven't done the second or third round of the MLS draft. I definitely think Linker Rodrigo dos Santos is worthy of getting drafted. He played soccer in Brazil. I remember interviewing Gabriel Alves, the left back on Marshall, a few years ago, and he went undrafted, even though he had first round tape and he had a really good interview. So we'll see what happens with Rodrigo dos Santos. It's a very long name. I'm not sure I'll be able to fit it into the mock draft without the logo going down to the right to the second line. It's just I appreciate you helping me with the research, but the next game is Denver, Indiana. I remember a few weeks ago Joey telling me not to sleep on Denver. Denver has 2 first round center backs in the MLS draft, and even though Todd Yeagley, the Indiana head coach, is one of the best coaches in the college soccer, I think Denver takes this. They are the home team, so I think if Indiana can beat Denver, though, we could be getting a third Indiana Pittsburgh Final Four game in 5 years. I mean, Indiana, that's the thing. Indiana's number 14, Denver's number 3. And Denver also has midfielder Sam Bassett, who could be an international player. He could choose to go play overseas in Europe rather than entering the MLS draft. So I like Denver to beat Indiana here. They're the top seed in this bracket. I think Denver beats Indiana, but you can't underestimate Todd Eagley because he's gotten Indiana to 2 championship games where they lost to Marshall in 2020 and Syracuse in 2022. You can't sleep on Indiana, Joey. I think both the upper brackets are really good because the first upper bracket on the left has Ohio State, Stanford, and then Clemson, Wake Forest. The two teams that met in the ACC title are playing in the other Sweet 16 game in the upper left bracket. Upper right bracket has Denver, Indiana, and then it has Virginia and Massachusetts. Massachusetts has Alec Hughes, three-time Atlantic 10 Offensive Player of the Year, going up against Virginia in that Virginia did get the semifinals of the ACC tournament as a 9 seed. They knocked out NC State and Pittsburgh on the road. And after they lost 4-0 to Pitt, instead of having 3 defenders, coach went back, made an adjustment, said, we're going to go with 4 defenders. We're going to run the 3-3-4, and we're going to have 2 center backs instead of 1. And I think that was the right decision because they ended up beating Pittsburgh in the ACC tournaments, the #1 team in that ACC region. So I think that was a good coaching adjustment by Virginia to make that adjustment. And we'll get to Virginia next, but I want to hear Joey talk about Denver, Indiana a little bit more because the matchups in the top bracket are good, and the matchups in the bottom brackets are kind of meh this year. It's called the pitch in soccer, but they can get down the field, get down the pitch, and they can make things happen. The only team that shut out Denver this year was Pittsburgh, but Pittsburgh's the #2 seed in the tournament. Denver's the 3 seed, and Denver and Pitt have gone each other. Like Denver and Pitt, they played each other out of conference 3 years in a row. Um, so I agree. Yep. Ian Smith, the center back, is a first round defender, and they also have Sam Bassett at midfielder. And I know there's one more player on Denver that I mocked in the first round of my MLS mock, but the name is not coming to me at this time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to load the mock really quickly and get the information on that. But you know, as great as it's been to watch UMass, I think Virginia's going to beat them today. I mean, Nick Dang, he's a center back projected to go in the top 10. And that Jason Belloli, Ian Smith and Jason Belloli, they're both center backs in Colorado. Ian Smith plays left back, Jason Belloli plays center back, but those two defenders are both projected to go in the top 20, Belloli and Smith. And they also have Sam Bassett at midfielder, who could end up in the top 5 of the MLS draft if he chooses to go pro in the MLS. He's also got offers to go to Europe on the table, play professionally overseas. So you look at Bassett at midfielder and the two defenders, Smith and Belloli at center back and left back. Um, that's I would try if I'm Indiana. I try to attack the right side of the defense. Leave the left alone and just try to attack the right side and beat Colorado's right side because I think that's your best bet here. I think the right side, even though the right side's strong, I think it's weaker than the left side. So that would be my game plan. I'm not sure if that would work, but that would be my strategy heading into the game if I'm Todd Eagley in Indiana. But as far as Virginia UMass goes, I like Virginia. They made the proper adjustments. Four defensemen beat Pitt. They go with three defensemen and think, oh, we don't. UMass doesn't have any talent. If they come in with that mindset, Alec Hughes will go off and UMass will upset Virginia. But I think this is a fun game considering there's five of the top seven picks this year are forwards at the striker position, and Alec Hughes is really the only striker among that five that's still in the tournament. I think this is a fun game. I like Virginia though to beat UMass. UMass has had a great run though. They beat Evansville. They beat number six Penn 1-0. But I think Virginia, this is the team that ends them, and Virginia ends up moving on to the Elite Eight. That would be. And then the next bracket, I'm going to get to the terrible bracket out of the way. Pittsburgh should end up in the Final Four because a lot of upsets happen in Pittsburgh's bracket. Pittsburgh beat Cornell 1-0. I was at that game. I thought Harris should have gotten a goal, but I thought Cornell played well for a team that lost to Pitt. I thought they played very well because Pittsburgh's only goal against Cornell came on a penalty kick, Joey, in the final. And one of the players on Pitt got a red card. Jackson Gilman, the junior defender, he got a red card in the first half. And Pitt played down a man, but still won 1-0 thanks to a penalty kick, which was the only goal in the game. And Alex Harris scored, but the goal was called off. So I think if that goal doesn't get called off, we're looking at, yeah. I mean, this is the number two team in the country. So I mean, they're expected to win this game. I mean, there's been a lot of upsets in this tournament. The Kansas City Roos knocked off St. Louis. They were underdogs against St. Louis. St. Louis was second in the Atlantic 10 this year behind Dayton. And Dayton's playing for, you know what, before we get to the pit bracket, let's focus on one other game tonight, which I skipped. Dayton plays SMU. The Southern Methodist Mustangs play the Dayton Flyers, and Dayton has home field throughout the rest of this tournament. They did win the Atlantic 10. I hope Dayton makes it in the Final Four as a Cinderella. I do, Joey. I'm with you there. I mean, SMU did push Wake Forest to penalty kicks in the ACC tournament, but I don't want to see three or four ACC teams in the Final Four as a fan. As a fan, that just annoys me. And I think Dayton would be a good underdog story. I think if we had Dayton and Denver, and then we had Pitt, and we had one of the ACC teams in the upper left bracket, I'd be okay with that. But if we have three or four ACC teams, it's going to saturate the tournament. Yeah. I'm not admitting the ACC isn't great. It's the best conference in college soccer, but as a fan, I don't want to see three or four ACC teams in the Final Four because it just defeats the purpose of having the tournament if we have an ACC conference tournament before the tournament. You know, Joey, it just defeats the purpose. What's the point? I'd say for the past decade, the two best mid majors in college soccer, the two most consistent mid majors in college soccer were Dayton and SMU. but now SMU's in the ACC, so they're no longer a mid-major. They're at a powerhouse conference. So I can't, yeah. And with Georgetown losing to North Carolina State, Dayton now has home field throughout the rest of this bracket as long as they keep winning. So I kind of want to see Dayton in the Final Four like I did with Pitt a few years ago. This is Dayton's window of opportunity to get to a Final Four. You're probably not going to have a path like this to the Final Four again for a long time. So you need to take advantage of this, Dayton. Dayton did shut out Michigan. So if Ohio State loses to Michigan in football, we are officially worse than Dayton. Dayton did shut out Michigan in soccer. So uh, Dayton's worst loss of the season came in the second game of the year where they got upset by the Jacksonville Dolphins. Jacksonville Dolphins shut out Dayton 3-0. But Dayton's beaten some good teams this year. They beat West Virginia. They've shut out a lot of good teams this year, but their worst loss came to the Jacksonville Dolphins. Um, Well, Dayton's got a really good defense, Joey. They have 7 shutouts on the year and 14 games where they've allowed 1 goal or less. In their quality wins, they beat Indiana on the road, who's still in the tournament. They also beat West Virginia at home 5-1. And West Virginia made the tournament, and they beat St. Louis Billikens. They swept the Billikens. I'm not going to say anything bad about the Jacksonville Dolphins, but in Dayton's defense, they tied Western Michigan, who was the number 9 team in the country. But they are, Dayton's a sneaky good under the radar team. They swept the St. Louis Billikens this year, which is pretty hard to do because I've interviewed Clint Kalash, the head coach of the St. Louis Billikens. I interviewed the head coach of their soccer program, and Kevin Kalish, and they beat St. Louis twice. Dayton's a good team. So, this is their window of opportunity to get to a Final Four. Oh, that game where Jacksonville shut them out, I think that may have been what a preseason game, or was that the opener? It says August 25th. Usually no, that was they held Mercy Detroit to 1 goal. So they had 15 games where they held their opponent to 1 goal, but their worst loss was 3-0 to Jacksonville. That was their only game where they gave up more than 3 goals, and it was early in the year. So That's the second game. That was the second game of the year. The opener, they beat UNLV 3-1. Or they beat no, they beat Detroit 5-1. The Detroit Mercy. They have a soccer basketball program, not mainly a football program. Okay, now I'm going to get to the other bracket. So I am picking Dayton and Denver to make the Final Four. But the other bracket, you have a lot of upsets happen in the Pittsburgh bracket. The Kansas City Roos, a team that got into the tournament last year with a less than 500 record after winning their conference, they upset the Billikens on the road, and they upset Missouri State. So they upset two good teams to get to the Sweet 16 where they're going to play Pittsburgh. And if they can upset Pittsburgh, because I had a player on Kansas City soccer team potentially reach out to me a few weeks ago after I made the MLS mock. You beat Pittsburgh, we'll have you on the podcast. And if you want to come on the podcast, just send me a message. If not, just keep working hard and preparing for the super draft because it's like, I did not expect the Roos to pull two upsets in a row. And if you beat Pittsburgh, you have a chance to top what George Mason did in basketball. I mean, this is just incredible what they've done so far. This is the thing, though, with college soccer. If you win your conference, you're in the tournament. George Mason had the best regular season record in the Atlantic 10, but because they lost in the semifinals, they didn't make the round of 48. Dayton made it. The runner-up, St. Louis made it. They were the sixth seed. They knocked out George Mason, and UMass made it. And they lost the quarterfinals. They didn't even make the semifinals, but they got in the tournament. And George Mason, who had the best regular season record, did not make the tournament this year, even though they deserved a spot, in my opinion. They got snubbed. Yeah, and it's not that I won't go to this game, but it's not that I don't want to go to this game. It's that this game's on a Sunday when football's on, and I don't know if the Roos have any prospects that MLS considers draft material. If they beat Pittsburgh, they will get on the radar, though. If they don't, I don't know if they'll have anybody that gets picked. But the next game's Vermont and San Diego because Missouri State was ranked number 15 and Kansas City knocked them out. San Diego was unranked. They knocked out number 10 Duke. The San Diego Toreros knocked out number 10 Duke. And number 7 Hofstra lost to Vermont. And to be fair to Vermont, Vermont made the Elite Eight 2 years ago when they lost to Syracuse, who was the eventual national champion, but they held Syracuse to 1 goal. Vermont held Syracuse to 1 goal. Creighton gave up 3 goals to Syracuse in the Final Four. And I believe the Indiana-Syracuse game was 1-1 until penalty kicks, where Syracuse beat Indiana penalty kicks. So Vermont, to their credit, they held Syracuse to 1 goal. They went into Syracuse and held them to 1 goal. So if one of these underdogs, whether it's Kansas City, San Diego, Vermont, knocks out Pittsburgh, I think Vermont has the best shot to do so. But this is probably the weakest region of the bracket. And I feel like Cornell, if they had beaten Pitt, they would have won this bracket because all the top dogs except for Pittsburgh, who were ranked in the top 16, are out of the tournament. So can anybody stop Pittsburgh from reaching Cary, North Carolina and play spoiler between Vermont, San Diego, and Kansas City? That's the big question. Do you have anything you want to add to that, Joey? Because they've got 3 underdogs here in Vermont, San Diego, and Kansas City. One of them could play spoiler. You got anything you want to add to that? There's in Pittsburgh's bracket, there's 3 underdogs: the San Diego Toreros, the Vermont Cataracts, and the Kansas City Roos. I don't think Kansas City's going to beat Pittsburgh, but Vermont, they lost to Syracuse in the Elite Eight a few years ago when they knocked out Duke. They knocked out Duke again. It's the second time in 3 years Vermont has knocked it out Duke in college soccer. I'm sorry. I just think that's hilarious that Vermont, because Vermont doesn't have the resources Duke has. So for them to knock out Duke, that's a testament to their athletic program. That's a testament to their college soccer program. I think one of their assistant coaches in scouting college soccer. So yeah, that's a good comparison. But you're saying Duke losing to Vermont in soccer is about as bad as Ryan Day losing to Michigan in football because they have more resources than Vermont as a athletic program. Duke does. They have way more resources. Well, San Diego's got two impact players: Sammy Kanan, 9 goals, 2 assists, and Caesar Bahena, 8 goals, 2 assists at striker and attacking midfielder. Bahena has 4 game-winning goals. Kanan has 5, and he's 2 for 2 on penalty kicks this year. So Kanan could be a dark horse to get drafted in the MLS Super Draft if San Diego's run continues. He's a junior. He's a junior. He's got 1 more year of eligibility left too if he goes undrafted. But Kanan could be a dark horse for the second or third round when it comes to scouting because not a lot of people are talking about San Diego right now. So I'm just trying to get an idea for what some of these teams have. Because I'm not going to go to the Pitt game against Kansas City. I might go to this Pitt Elite Eight game. It was electric. I went to the Pitt Eight game against Portland 2 years ago. The crowd was electric there. I think, but I don't think the opponent. I don't think San Diego or Vermont is as good as Portland was 2 years ago. I mean, they pushed Pitt to their limit. Yeah. Or you can go to a bigger school if you enter the portal, because a lot of guys they start out at these smaller schools and then they'll transfer to a powerhouse program to play against the best in their senior years. So he could enter the portal and go to an ACC team. That's become more common in recent years. Yeah. Well, Vermont's interesting because I'm studying Vermont, and Vermont has both of Vermont's captains are center backs. Adrian Scholes Solano is a captain now, and their other captain is a player that's been on my radar for a few years, Zach Barrett. I remember telling you about Zach Barrett on the podcast a few years ago when Vermont played Syracuse during his sophomore year. And Barrett is now a 2-year captain, and they also have Max Murray at striker. Murray was another guy on my radar when Vermont played Syracuse a few years ago. So Vermont, they got a decent team. I think they are a team a lot of people are sleeping on right now. I think they're going to end up playing Pitt in the Elite Eight next Saturday. Yeah. Well, I'm also looking up the stats for Vermont. Yaniv Bazzini at striker has 11 goals and 2 assists, and Sidney Watula has 1 goal, 14 assists. So Watula and Bazzini have outproduced Max Murray. So they've got like 5 impact players on Vermont out of 11. So they've got a chance. I think they'll get to the Elite Eight, but I don't think they'll beat Pittsburgh. But I think they've got the best chance of keeping Pittsburgh from returning to Cary, North Carolina. Yaniv Bazzini, the number 11. You like him? Yaniv Bazzini, just confirming. Yeah. Well, Bazzini's only had 11 goals on the year, but 3 of those goals came in the tournament. He scored 2 goals against Iona in the round of 48, and he got a goal against Hofstra. So if Bazzini just keeps playing out of his mind in this tournament, and Vermont center backs just keep helping the team get shutouts, Vermont can go very far in this tournament. I mean, he scored on Albany, Connecticut, Lehigh. He scored on Western Michigan. Vermont opened up the season against Western Michigan. Western Michigan won 3-1, but Bazzini did score on Western Michigan, and Western Michigan has a very good defense. Yep. Yeah. And then the final bracket is the Ohio State, Stanford, Wake Forest, Clemson bracket. Florian had Pittsburgh beating Stanford in the championship back in August. Stanford, they knocked out number 1 Marshall last year. They've got 9 of their 11 starters returning. This Stanford team frightens me. I'm picking Stanford to win and hoping the Buckeyes use it as motivation to beat Stanford in soccer tomorrow. But I am picking Stanford to win because here's the thing, Joey. No number 1 seed in men's college soccer has won it all since North Carolina back in 2011. They were the last number 1 overall seed to win the entire tournament. It is very hard to win the tournament as a number 1 seed because you've got that target on your back. You've got that big target on your back, and everybody's gunning for you. But you got to rise above it. And the last team that reached the finals as the 1 seed was Virginia in 2019. Yeah. Well, the Chiefs beat the Eagles in Super Bowl 57. I believe the Celtics were a 1 seed last year when they won the NBA Finals. So I believe they were number one. Cavs were the 4 seed that year. Celtics were 1. Yeah. Louisville was the last number 1 seed to win the men's basketball tournament in 2013 when they had Rick Pitino. I believe the Dodgers had the best regular season record this year, and the Yankees had the best AL record. So it was 1v1 in the World Series. Yeah. And in the last MLS Cup, which we're going to get to in a second, LAFC won the Supporters Shield and the MLS Cup in 2022 when Magic Johnson took over as an owner for LAFC, and they had their starting goalie was injured. They beat the Philadelphia Union in that game, and then they got back to the MLS Cup, and they were underdogs against Columbus because FC Cincinnati won the Supporters Shield, but Columbus knocked out FC Cincinnati in the conference finals, and because Columbus had a better regular season record than LAFC, despite LAFC being the 1 seed. LAFC had to travel to Columbus last year. But we'll get into the MLS Cup in a second. I do like Stanford over Ohio State. Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, and I think the last number 1 seed to win the Stanley Cup, the last President's Trophy winner to win the Stanley Cup, President's Trophy goes to hockey team with the best regular season record, was the Blackhawks in 2012, 2013. So they were the last number 1 team in the regular season to win the cup. So it hasn't happened in hockey very much. It hasn't happened in college basketball. It hasn't happened in college soccer. So I just think Stanford's more experienced, and I think that's going to be they're going to play Clemson for the right to go to the Final Four. Clemson's playing Wake Forest. I know Wake Forest is the home team, and Wake did beat Clemson to win it all and carry North Carolina to win the ACC regular season title. But Clemson's still the defending champions, and Wake Forest does have the best goalie in this draft, Trace Alfin. He is the best goalie in the MLS draft in Wake Forest. Stanford three-peated in men's soccer from 2015 to 2017. Stanford three-peated. Stanford was the men's soccer champion in 2015, 2016, and 2017, right when I started the podcast with Kerm and Joey. So Stanford three-peated in men's soccer from 2015 to 2017. But in their defense, they got Charlotte's head coach because in 2011, North Carolina defeated the Charlotte 49ers to win the championship. Yeah, Charlotte went on this miraculous run and got all the way to the championship. So Stanford hired Charlotte's head coach, and then they three-peated from 2015 to 2017. And that coach is still on Stanford to this day. But yeah, Charlotte made the championship in college soccer in 2011 when North Carolina won it all. Isn't that nuts, Joey, that the Charlotte 49ers actually made a championship game? I mean, you got to tip your hat to Charlotte. They actually got that far, which is impressive for Charlotte because they're not seen as a powerhouse program in sports, but they're a good group of 5 team. So the fact that Charlotte got that far, that's kind of impressive. But yeah, I think Stanford's going to beat Ohio State, and I like Clemson over Wake Forest. But I think whoever wins the Clemson Stanford game has a very good chance of getting to the finals because I think Clemson would probably play Dayton if they beat Stanford. I think they'd win that, and it would probably set up a Clemson championship against the Denver Pitt winner because Denver, they beat Pitt in Pittsburgh when Noel got injured. Then Pitt went to Denver and lost to Denver, and then Pitt finally beat Denver this year 2-0. So if Pitt beats Denver again in the Final Four, I think it would set up a Clemson Pitt championship, and I would probably take Pitt over Clemson in that scenario. It'll be interesting because I think Stanford barely beat UC Santa Barbara. UC Santa Barbara took Stanford to penalty kicks, and Stanford Clemson game was scoreless until the 73rd minute when Clemson got on the board. So Stanford pushed Clemson to their limit. They were one of the few teams in college soccer that pushed Clemson to their limit this year. And if they win the rematch, Florian's prediction of Pittsburgh versus Stanford has a very good chance of becoming a reality. And you picked them to win it in 2021. You were right then. We both picked Syracuse to beat Indiana in 22. So you've been right the last 3 years in college soccer. Yeah, because you got the College Cup. The College Cup's going to be not this Friday, but next Friday, but December 6th and 7th. That's when the Elite Eight games are, and there's three of them. I might, if Vermont ends up playing Pittsburgh, I might go to that game. I don't know what time it'll be at, but I remember going to the Portland Pitt game. That it was freaking packed. There were like 10,000, 20,000 people in there. It was impossible to walk. You have to get there like super early in order to get like tickets and stuff. So, you know, I don't know what time that game is at. If it's like at 2 or 3, I'll probably go. But if it's because I remember the Pitt Portland game was at noon, and we managed to end the podcast early that day because I wanted to go to that game, be part of history. It was a fun game. I mean, it was scoreless until like the 118th minute when Valentin Noel scored to beat Portland. Florian was rooting for Portland because they were his favorite team, and then it was just a crazy game. Like because Portland had kept Pitt scoreless for 110, 120 minutes, and it was like 30 degrees outside, but it wasn't snowing. There was a game against Northern Illinois when Anthony Markanovich and Nick Markanovich, the two twins of Northern Illinois, were draft eligible. And it was like 6 degrees and it was snowing in Pittsburgh. So I have seen Pitt soccer play in the snow. That's the coldest game I've ever attended as a fan, but you know, we'll see. And Pittsburgh's got two good center backs as well. They've got Jackson Gilman and they've got Nicholas Sorensen. One's a junior, the other's a true freshman. But the thing I noticed about Sorensen is when he was trying to pass the ball to teammates, Alex Harris, the Cornell forward, got up in his face, took space away from him, and he managed to rattle him. And it's like, you're supposed to be the top freshman defender in college soccer, and you're allowing a sophomore forward to rattle you. Like, that's freshman defender in the country, and you're allowing him to rattle you. So you got to get rid of the ball quicker. I give him credit for making accurate passes, but I was expecting more fight in the dog when it came to Sorensen. All bark, no bite. I want to see more bite from him moving forward. I mean, he Clemson ran through a guy and won ACC Freshman of the Year over Sorensen, which surprised me because I thought Sorensen started more games and played better. But Ransford Guyan was the New Jersey Gatorade High School Player of the Year 2 years in a row, which is very hard to do. And there were people calling Ransford Guyan on Clemson the Ghanaian version of Lionel Messi. They were hyping the crap out of this kid. Struggled to begin the year, but he picked up his stride later in the season. And now, if he continues to dominate, Clemson could be in a very advantageous position.
Amelia, turn off alarm.
Yeah, and Clemson's got Adam Lundgaard at center back. They also have another senior at center back, and they've got Arthur Gillette at left back or right back. So Clemson's got a very strong back line. They've got one of the best coaches in college soccer, and they play at historic Riggs Field, which is one of the best, loudest stadium environments in men's college soccer. So Clemson, I think they will beat Wake Forest. They'll get even with them for beating them in the ACC championship, and then they'll but the problem is the ACC tournament's televised, the regular season's televised, the rest of the games, you can't get the rest of the games until the Final Four and championship unless you have ESPN Plus. That's the big problem with college soccer. Put these tournament games on television. It's like Ohio State, Stanford. Sucks the Pac-12 network no longer exists, but put that on ACC network on a Sunday or a Big Ten network on a Sunday. What else is on a Sunday during football season? Put that game on television. This is not rocket science. Put the Clemson Wake Forest game on the ACC network. This is not hard. Like Denver, Indiana, that would be a perfect game to put on the Big Ten networks today. But it's 4 p.m. I know there's football on at 4 p.m. But like outside of Ohio State, Michigan, what's up for grabs in the Big Ten? And as far as a spot goes, Penn State's not playing Indiana, so I think they play at noon today. So like, I just wish these companies, I wish these companies would take advantage of these opportunities to put these games on television. There's some good matchups. I'm disappointed that these games are not on television, but there are a lot of good matchups and a lot of quality teams. Anything else we need to add before we get to the MLS bracket? And with college football on, these companies like the Big Ten Network, the ACC Network, they're going to say, you know what? We're prioritizing the college football game, even if it's a crappy game with zero bowl implications over a college soccer tournament game. So the networks, they're going to decide to do that because football brings in higher ratings. That's not really the wrong decision. It, so here are the two ACC games. There's three ACC games on ACC Network today, all football. Duke, Wake Forest, North Carolina State. That's airing at the same time as college soccer games. I can understand why they are airing that instead. Virginia, Virginia Tech. So I can understand why they're picking the rivalry games over soccer. Those are going to bring in more ratings. From a business standpoint, that makes complete sense for the ACC network. Complete sense. I'm not going to argue with their decision to air those games. Let's do the Big Ten network airing, and then we'll get into it. Well, they're airing volleyball, the Big Ten network at 7. So, I mean, volleyball is pretty popular, though, among women. So I'm not going to really argue against that. If there was a game featuring a Big Ten team, yeah, if there was a game with a Big Ten team, I would argue you could air that. But volleyball is a cool sport. I'm not going to really say anything bad about it. But let's get into the MLS here. Conference finals are today. Um, and I think we're going to get Orlando in the LA Galaxy. I think that is going to be the championship game. But, you know, Orlando plays New York Red Bulls today. I like New York to win this game. The Red Bulls, a lot of people are picking the Red Bulls. And to be fair to the Red Bulls, they did defeat both Columbus and Cincinnati to get here. But both teams, the headline in MLSsoccer.com, Orlando City Red Bulls look to make some history, quote, in Eastern Conference Final. That's the headline in MLS Soccer. But you know, Orlando, they're going to play the Red Bulls at 7:30. Joey bet $1 on Orlando when they had 4,000 to 1 odds, and now the winner of this is going to go to the MLS Cup. I do think it's going to be Orlando. But there's a lot of people that think the Red Bulls are going to win because the Red Bulls midfielder Daniel Edelman said, "We're not satisfied and we're the underdogs. They gave us the 7th seed, act like everyone's counting us out. And we're here just to show everyone that we're a bunch of dogs on the field." Okay. I like that energy from the Red Bulls, but I think Orlando's the better team. And here's the thing: if the Red Bulls win, Joe, my favorite MLS team is the LA Galaxy. They play the Sounders tonight. The winner of that is going to host next Saturday's MLS Cup. And if it's Orlando, LA, it's going to be Joey's $40 versus my favorite team. If the Red Bulls beat Orlando and the Galaxy win, if the Red Bulls beat Orlando and the Galaxy end up playing the Red Bulls, Joey's going to be rooting for the Galaxy because he's going to be pissed that the Red Bulls screwed him out of $40. Um, that's just the bottom line. I think he'd root for whoever comes out of the West between LA and Seattle. But Seattle, they play at Lumen Field where the Seahawks play. So if Seattle knocks out the Galaxy, Orlando goes to Seattle. Yeah, if you're good, that basically, if the Red Bulls knock out Orlando, Joey's rooting for the Western Conference champion between LA and Seattle. basically, in the final next Saturday. That's what I figured, but just wanted to confirm that. I don't want to speak for Joey. And look, I'm predicting Orlando to beat the LA Galaxy. The LA Galaxy are my favorite team, but I'm picking Orlando to win the MLS Cup because I think they have a more complete roster on paper. I like their back line. I think Duncan McGuire is due for greatness. There are some teams in Europe actually looking at Duncan McGuire. So, if he does get picked up by a European team in the next few years, Orlando's going to be in a rebuild again. And this is really their best opportunity to cash in on an MLS Cup while they have Duncan McGuire. And Miami's going to be better next year. There's a lot of teams hiring new coaches in the MLS, but Columbus and Cincinnati are going to be better next year. So this is Orlando's best opportunity to win a championship. And here's the other thing. Since the MLS Cup started in 1996, only two underdogs have won the MLS Cup. The 1998 Chicago Fire were an expansion team in 1998 with Bob Bradley as their head coach, and they went up against Bruce Arena, who was the then head coach of DC United, and beat the two-time MLS Cup champion DC United before DC United won their third cup in 4 years in 99 against the Galaxy. And the other time an upset happened was 2009. Real Salt Lake beat the LA Galaxy in penalty kicks. Walter Football wanted to watch Sports Center, so he went on a rant about how the MLS Cup is a jerk of the week for delaying Sports Center and the NFL highlights. He was pissed about that MLS Cup going into penalty kicks. To be fair to Walt, I was pissed too. I was rooting for the Galaxy to win that cup, and Real Salt Lake won as underdogs. But this will be the 29th MLS Cup, and in 28 years, we've only had two upsets. MLS started in 1996, and the next year will be the 29th. This year will be the 29th MLS Cup. So we've only had two upsets in 28 years. We've had no upsets in 15 years. This is why Joey views the MLS as a little brother compared to the other four major sports: NFL, NHL, NBA, MLB, because there's more parity in those sports. And the Galaxy are the favorite to win the MLS Cup. They scored 6 goals on Minnesota in the second round. The Galaxy are an overwhelming favorite. They have matched the Columbus Crew for most goals in the MLS playoffs. Them and the Crew both had 15 goals during the playoffs, which is insane. But yeah, they had 9 goals in 2 games against Colorado, and they had 6 against Minnesota. So it's like the Galaxy are really good. That's why I picked the Galaxy to win the Western Conference, and I had them beating Seattle when most people were riding the LAFC jock because LAFC was a 2-time Western Conference champion and they were the number 1 seed. I told people that they lost 2 center backs, they lost the goalie. That's going to catch up with them at some point, and Seattle knocked them out just like I predicted. So to my credit, I kind of anticipated what was going to happen in the West, but I did not anticipate the level of chaos that we would get in the Eastern Conference. But I think we're going to get Orlando, and I think we're going to get the LA Galaxy next week. Who do you like you think we're going to get that matchup next week, Orlando versus the LA Galaxy? Is that the matchup you think we'll ultimately end up getting? Yeah, they've got Greg Noonan. Greg Noonan to Toronto to Greg Noonan, Galaxy head coach was with Toronto. A lot of people don't realize the LA Galaxy head coach Greg Vanney was the head coach on Toronto from for many years. Because Toronto had that run in the late 2010s where Toronto, yeah, from 2014 to 2020, Greg Vanney was with Toronto FC, and they made 3 MLS Cups in 2016, 2017, and 2019. They only won one of those And then Vanny has a down year in 2020, and Toronto fires him after he takes him to 3 MLS Cups, and the Galaxy ended up hiring him as their new head coach. I don't think their depth chart and starting 11s is complete as Orlando's. That's why I'm picking Orlando to win it all. Because I remember telling Joey that Orlando, Miami, Columbus, Cincinnati all have really good starting 11s back in the preseason. And there wasn't that dominant team in the West with good starting 11. The Galaxy have the best coach, and they're the only team in MLS history with 4 different 10-goal scorers. I give them credit for that. But they don't have a complete depth chart on paper. I think that's going to matter in the MLS Cup, and I like Orlando to upset the LA Galaxy for that reason. I'll be rooting for the Galaxy if they play Orlando, but I'm expecting them to lose. I mean, my teams have burned me in 2024. Dallas burned me, the Cleveland Guardians burned me, and I'm preparing for the Galaxy to burn me in the championship if they don't burn me in the conference finals tonight. I would argue Orlando's complete. They got a great starting 11 along with Cincinnati, Columbus, Miami, but those teams lost. Orlando's the last complete team standing, the team with the most. Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean Atlanta upset number one Miami as a 9 seed, so they end up getting the semifinals of the Eastern Conference as a 9 seed before losing to Orlando, and the Red Bulls and New York City FC ended up upsetting Cincinnati and Columbus in the first round, setting up a 6-7 matchup in round two, which is very rare. It's very rare to have the 6 seed playing the 7 seed in the second round of a playoff. That's pretty rare. And it's just time for an underdog to win the MLS Cup. It's time, Joey. It's been 15 years since an underdog won the MLS Cup. That is too freaking long. I can understand if it's 5 years. I can live with an underdog going 10 years without a championship if the team that wins the championship is a really good team, a really complete team. But 15 years is just too long. It's time for an underdog to win in MLS. It's been 15 years. That's too freaking long. Plus 4,000. They were, yeah, plus 4,000 at the beginning of the playoffs. Now they've got the second best odds behind the Galaxy. But it's interesting because the last time Orlando won the women's league, and the last time Orlando was in the finals for men for any professional sport was 2009 when they had Dwight Howard and lost to the Lakers, and then 1994 when they lost to the Houston Rockets with Shaq. Those are the last 2 times Orlando made a finals in any men's sport. The women's team in Orlando won the women's soccer championship. So I think would be pretty cool to have Orlando winning the men's and women's soccer championship. Orlando deserves something nice. Look, I'm a Galaxy fan, but Orlando has suffered for years in the world of sports. And LA did take Shaq from Orlando. So, maybe this is Orlando's turn. The Magic had a chance to win game one, but one of their forwards missed free throws and it kept Houston in the game. And that changed the momentum of the series completely because Orlando had home court and they just weren't the same after that. Yep. Yeah, I'm switching to the Ohio State Michigan game on my TV, but the first thing that pops up on my TV is NBC Nightly News Kids Edition with Lester Holt. I never knew that Lester Holt had there was a kids edition of NBC Nightly News. That's new to me. I just learned that in the next few minutes. I'm not gonna say anything bad about Lester Holt. He's one of the better broadcasters, so but I just think that's strange. Well, Disney's going to appoint a new CEO at the beginning of 2025, and there is some speculation that it's going to be Kathleen Kennedy, who ruined Star Wars. There is some speculation she's in the running to be the new CEO of Disney. So that may be why Lucas is trying to buy back. Yeah, and I'll get into the WNBA mock draft now. We've spent a lot of time going over the MLS. We've spent a lot of time going over the MLS. I enjoy your thoughts. I'm trying to get the final topic out of the way before the I agree. Can tell by your vocal tonality, the passion, the conviction you show. You can tell Joey's a former football coach. I'm going to get into the WNBA mock draft before I get to the Ohio State Michigan game. The Dallas Wings won the lottery. Paige Buchers out of Connecticut. Arike Ogunbowale, one of the best point guards in the WNBA, is going to move to shooting guard. Um, I Paige Buchers, I think, is going to be the point guard for the Dallas Wings, and they're going to probably take her number one overall. Because Paige Buchers is considered the favorite to go number one this year. She did well against Caitlin Clark last year. Um, I do think there's better players in college basketball, but they're not draft eligible yet. So I think Buchers probably goes number one. She does have one more year of eligibility due to thanks to COVID, but she's a senior, but thanks to the COVID bubble, she does have one more year of NCAA eligibility if she doesn't want to play for Dallas. So she could go back to college, but if she declares, she will be the number one pick. At number two, I've got Notre Dame's Olivia Miles, the Sparks. There's a lot of people that have Kiki Irefin, who's a good power forward, but the Sparks have Cameron Brink and Rakea Jackson at small forward and power forward, and the two centers they had last year are under contract with Azura Stevens and De'Erica Hamby. They have both of those centers back, so I don't think they're going to draft a forward at two and go best player available. I think they're going to get a point guard, and I like Olivia Miles out of Notre Dame here for the Sparks at two. Yep, I agree. Which is why it's laughable that a lot of these WNBA mock drafts are mocking a power forward to the Sparks at two. It's just laughable. You have Cameron Brink. She's going to be a superstar. Unless you want to move her to center, it makes zero sense to drop the power forward at two unless you want to move Brink to center. And I think she's a better fit at power forward. Yeah, and she's engaged, so she's off the market for any singles that were hoping to date Cameron Brink. She's off the market. Her boyfriend proposed to her, and she said yes. So she's off the market. Just clarifying that, and we're happy. We're happy for the Brink. So I feel like a lot of people that do these mock drafts would rather go for the best player available than fill out their starting five if they're in a rebuild. And if you're in a rebuild like the Sparks, you don't have a first round pick in 2026. You got to fill out that starting five now. That's not a luxury you have. Wait, they are in a rebuild, but if they're a point guard and a shooting guard away from being a contender, but they only have one first round pick this year, they don't have a first round pick in 2026. I think the Sky own that pick. So the Sky are going to have multiple first round picks this year and next year. Um, so no, the Storm own their pick. The Storm own the Galaxy. Get a point guard or a shooting guard. Get the best guard in the draft, and you'll be ready to compete next year. That's really all you got to do. I agreed. But Olivia Miles doubled her 3-point percentage this year. Olivia Miles, 18.6 points per game, 8 rebounds a game, 6.8 assists, 1.5 steals, 55.7 field goal percentage, 75% free throw percentage, 54.2 free throw percentage. What's interesting is both Paige Buchers and Olivia Miles did suffer season-ending injuries, but they've both recovered from those. But if you draft Olivia Miles at point guard, you'd have her, you'd have Lexi Brown or Laisha Clarendon at shooting guard, Rakea Jackson with 3 years left on her rookie deal at small forward, Cameron Brink with 3 years left on her rookie deal at power forward, and Dearica Hamby or Azura Stevens at center. I mean, Stevens came back after Hamby got injured. But if Hamby, Brink, and Stevens are healthy, this is a team that could sneak in as a 7 or 8 seed. I'm not saying they'll win the WNBA finals, but they could definitely sneak into next year's playoffs because they're going to have the starting five. The Dallas Wings are going to have a good starting five with Bukers. I think both. There is. Agreed. I mean, the other thing with the Dallas Wings is they are losing their small forward and their power forward. So even if Bukers dominates, they may miss the playoffs just if they can't bring back Natasha Howard and Satao Sala because Sabali and Howard did both average over 10 points a game for the Dallas Wings, but they're both free agents. If either of them doesn't come back, then Dallas is still in a rebuild. So we got to wait and see what happens with Dallas. But I think the Sparks and the Wings, Wings, it depends on what free agents they bring back. But Sparks, I think, are positioned very nicely. Number 3, the Chicago Sky. I do have Anissa Morrow going to the Sky at 3. Um, Here's why. Anissa Morrow was born in Chicago, and number 2, she was teammates with Angel Reese at LSU. So I think those things align to Morrow being the pick for the Sky at 3 because they had 4 double-digit point scorers last year. One was traded, one was a free agent, and the other 2 are Angel Reese and Elizabeth Williams at power forward at center. So you got Cardoso for depth behind Williams at center, but you need a small forward. You need a shooting guard. You need a point guard. Anissa Morrow is a small forward at LSU. She was born in Chicago. She's teammates with Angel Reese at LSU. It makes the most logistical sense to draft Morrow because her and Reese will hit it off. Yeah, Sky Sky had the third worst record. The Dallas Wings had the second worst record. The Sparks had the worst record. I still think the Wings could be competitive if they bring back their small forward and power forward, but they're both free agents. We don't know if they're going to bring them back. They might leave. And they're also Kelsey Mitchell. You said a few weeks ago Kelsey Mitchell might leave the Fever to join the Sky. So if that happens, I think they'll probably draft a small forward and a point guard to round out the starting five so they can compete for a playoff spot this season. I think that's going to be the thought process for the Sky. But the thing with yeah, yeah, and Morrow can play either the 2 at shooting guard or the 3 at small forward. She started her first 2 seasons at DePaul, then she transferred to LSU last year. So Morrow I do think Morrow, 18 points a game, 13 rebounds per game. I do think Morrow is the pick for the Sky at 3. It just makes too much sense. The chemistry she would have with Reese just makes too much sense to draft her. She's from Chicago, and it's a position of need. Yep. Yep. Warren just threw a first down for Michigan, but the Washington Mystics are up at 4. I went with a surprise pick at number 4 for the Mystics. I went with Olivia Pollard, small forward Santa Clara, because after Morrow, there really isn't a dominant small forward in this draft. Pollard has dominated at Santa Clara this year, 22 points a game, 48.6 field goal percentage. And, the Elia Edwards Mystics drafted Elia Edwards to replace Elena Del Don in last year's WNBA draft. But you have Ariel Atkins at point guard, Brittany Sykes at shooting guard, Elia Edwards at power forward, and Shakira Austin at center. So you need a small forward. That's literally the low need you have. You could trade this pick to get some picks in next year's draft, but I mean, if you're going to reach for a small forward, get Pollard. Pollard can average 22 points a game. She's consistent. She's effective. She's an exceptional shooter. Started at shooting guard, converted to small forward in college. And she is a player that gave USC some problems. USC did beat Santa Clara, but she's a player that gave the Trojans some problems. So Olivia Pollard, she's not in any of the WNBA mocks at the moment, but I've got my eye on Pollard. I think she's a riser in this year's WNBA draft. I have her all the way at number 4 this early in the process. Her her shooting percentage is 66.7 from free throws, 42.4 from 3-point range, and 48.6 field goal percentage. So, I mean, Yep. And Pollard complements the Mystics starting five. But let's get to the next pick, the expansion team Golden State Valkyries. Now they got to go best player on the board because they don't have any good. They don't really have a face of the team yet. And when you need five different players in the starting five, you just take the best player on the board and then go from there, and then fill out the roles of the team as you're building the team up. But Kiki Irafane, who is considered the second best player, falls to five. She's a power forward at USC. There's really a lot of the teams outside of Dallas don't need power forwards in the 2 through 4 spots. So Ira Finch slides down to five, but she could be the face of the Golden State Valkyries. And, Golden State's going to be the Vegas didn't have a first round pick for first workplace violations, but the Valkyries are joining the WNBA this year. Portland and Toronto are going to join in 2026. So it's going to go from 12 to 13 to 15. And I'm guessing Cleveland will get a team in 2027 because they are trying to, the Cavs ownership is trying tooth and nail to get a WNBA team back in Cleveland. And I think they will get one in 2027 if I had to take an educated guess, right before the Browns get open to the stadium. Well, right now, the WNBA wants to get a 16th team in the league by 2028, but I think 2027 be better. I just hate having an odd number of teams in a league. Okay, you're going to go from 12 to 13 this year, and then 13 to 15 next year. I hate having an I hate having an odd number of teams in a league. It doesn't matter what league it is. I hate that. It just irritates the crap out of me. I don't think, but there's a few teams: Cleveland, Seattle. The favorite right now, according to insiders in the WNBA, is Austin, Texas. Austin, Texas is the favorite, but Cleveland and Seattle are in the running. Philadelphia is also in the running for that expansion in the WNBA. Philadelphia is also in the running. Um, Kansas City's also in the running. Patrick Mahomes, the ownership group with Kansas City, he's trying to get an NHL or WNBA team to come to Kansas City. And they've got the T-Mobile Center, Sprint Center that they built in 2007, but they haven't been able to get a permanent tenant in that arena. Yeah, they've got the Royals, and they've got the Sprint Center, and then they have the because the Royals are going to build a new stadium. They're going to get rid of Kauffman. They're going to build a new stadium that's right by the Sprint's. It's T-Mobile Center. I keep calling it the Sprint Center. It was the Sprint Center when it started, but T-Mobile bought out Sprint in the merger, so it's now the T-Mobile Center. But that's the thing. Like, I mean, because right now the Royals and Chiefs stadiums are right next to each other, and it's in a deserted area, like a parking lot. And then you've got Sporting Kansas City for MLS, and you've got the women's soccer team. But there's really not much else there. It's not that it's a bad location, it's just there's not much there right now. And I think that I'm pretty sure Joey's talking about the parking lot outside of Arrowhead and Kauffman Stadium that's just vacant. Like there's nothing there. What is it called? It's really the Chiefs have a code of conduct for the parking lot. No parking where the players park. You must park in these specific letter locations, and everything's color coded. It's like, okay, very corporate. It's very corporate, you know. Well, what's interesting is one of the Chiefs players parked in a spot where Patrick Mahomes likes to park his car, and Patrick Mahomes got pissed off and he told the player he had to move his car, and the Chiefs supported Mahomes on that, not the player who parked their car where Mahomes likes to park his car. It's just a very trivial thing to get pissed off about, but if you're trying to rattle Mahomes, make sure to park your car in his spot. If you're an opposing team, tell him we're not moving. That's the territory. When you've won as much as Mahomes, you have those bragging rights. So if the backup kicker parked where Patrick Mahomes parked and refused to move their car, they'd get cut from the team. They'd get cut from the team. There wouldn't even be a discussion. They'd get cut from the team because they're the backup kicker. Or a special teams player like a punter or kicker. Not Butker. If it's not Butker and they park in Mahomes' spot, they're getting cut. That's basically what I'm saying. Yep. Yeah, Kiki Ireland. We've gone from WNBA fans Chiefs to parking in Patrick Mahomes' spot. It's fun how these tangents are. I'm gonna get back to the WNBA mock. Yeah. Yeah, I'm gonna Kiki Irefin. I mocked her the Valkyrie. She's listed at number 2. She did not break out until her junior season when she complimented Cameron Brink, 19.4 points, 11 rebounds, all as a complimentary player to Brink at Stanford. Then she transfers to USC because they have Juju Watkins, who's probably the number 1 player in 26 or 27, and only 16.8 points per game. Not as dominant at USC versus Stanford. Maybe that's because of the double teams Brink was commanding. But Irifin's a top 5 player. She has the medium range you want. She's got to be more consistent from short and long range, but she can defend any position, whether it's the 1, the 2, the 3, the 4, the 4 at power forward. The only But everybody else sees her as a superstar, so they have her at number 2 to the Sparks. The Sparks are not going to draft her. They have Brink and they have Rakea Jackson. It makes zero sense for them to draft her. Worst case, best case for her is Dallas passes on Paige Buchers and takes Kiki at 1. And if they don't, she probably drops to 5. She probably drops to Golden State at 5 because they're the only team. They need help. Golden State's an expansion team. They need help everywhere. The other teams in the top 4 all have good power forwards. I mean, the Sparks have Cameron Brink, the Sky of Angel Reese, and the Washington Mystics drafted Elia Edwards in the first round out of Connecticut. They're not going to give up on Elia after 1 year, even if Irefin's a better player. They're not going to give up on her. They're not. And if Elena Del Don comes back, it would make zero sense to draft her because she'd be competing with Edwards for backup minutes. So she's a consensus number 2 player in this draft, which I disagree with, but I think she'll get picked in the top 5, but I have her at number 5. And then the Mystics pick again at 6. I've got Sonia Citron, the Notre Dame shooting guard, who is teammates with Olivia Miles coming off the board at number 6. She doesn't shoot from short, medium, and long range consistently, but she's in the top 5. And the Mystics, they have a point guard and a shooting guard in contract years, so I think they'll get a. I think the Mystics will get a small forward at 4, and then they'll go best guard on their board at 6 and develop that player for a year before starting them. I have Sonia Citron, but you can make a case for Georgia Amore, the Kentucky point guard that played at Virginia Tech. You can make a case for Cheyenne Sellers here too. I think it just really depends on who you prefer. And she has 10 points per game. She's doing enough to be considered a first round pick, but she's not moving the needle. 20% from 3-point range as a senior. She's made 100% of her free throws, but she's only making 20% of her 3-point shots. So Dame has two guards projected to go in the top six, but one of them's overhyped because one of them might be overhyped. I'm not going to say they are overhyped. They might be overhyped because TCU went into South Bend last night and defeated Notre Dame in women's basketball. TCU knocked Notre Dame's like number 3 in the country in women's basketball, and TCU knocked them off last night. So absolutely, I'm the same way when it comes to. Yeah, I agree. Citron is the sixth best player, but I think after the top five with Kiki Irefin, I think it's wide open as to who goes number six. I've got Citron for now, but I think someone's probably going to jump her in the next mock. I went Georgia Amore, the Kentucky point guard of the Liberty. The Liberty, Courtney Vandersloot and Brianna Stewart are unrestricted free agents. I think Stewart will be back, but Vandersloot went from averaging 10 points a game in 2023 to averaging 6.7. I think they're going to move on from her and they're going to draft her replacement because the Liberty and Phoenix Mercury swapped first round picks in this draft. So the Liberty, the WNBA champions, drafted center, and I think Georgia Amore is in play. I don't know who they'll take, but I think there's multiple players in play um, for those teams. I think T. Heine T. Heine Papal, South Carolina, and Cheyenne Sellers, Maryland, are both going to be at play at number 7, along with Georgia Amore. But I went with Amore because I like her game the best from a shooting standpoint and from a passing standpoint. I think she's the most complete of the three. But I think any of those 3 point guards could be in play for the Liberty here at 7. Look, if you're the Liberty, if you want to be a dynasty, draft Georgia Amore or Cheyenne Sellers. This is very simple. If you draft one of them and you pair them with Sabrina, you pair them with John Kell Jones, your WNBA MVP, you pair them with Brianna Stewart, and you keep letting me Hamilton. This is a team that's going to be competitive for years to come. You're going to be the Eastern Conference version of the Ace. There's 3 good point guards that they could take here at 7. But New York's going to take a point guard. I know they drafted a point guard in the first round of last year's draft, but that point guard really didn't move the needle. It's not that she can't be the gal. It's just she didn't show that her rookie year when Vandersloot regressed. So I think they're probably going to get drafted their point guard, and that's going to be the new starter, or they'll make her compete. I had a more in my I think I had a more in my top 10 last year, and she went back. That's kind of why I put her at 7. But I think it's an either or argument. I don't think she's running away with the position. I think she's the favorite right now. I probably will move Sellers up in the next mock. I'm just monitoring what these players are doing between now and the end of the season. A more with 15.4 points a game right now and 88.2 free throw percentage. The 3-point percentage of 28.6 has to improve. The 37.1 field goal percentage, that's got to improve as well. But she transferred from Virginia Tech to Kentucky because Virginia Tech's coach got fired. So we'll see what happens with her. Yep. Yep. I mean, the Indiana Fever, I think they're either going to go with it's hard to say. The Fever of Caitlin Clark at point guard, and Alyssa Smith can play small forward or power forward. Aliyah Boston can play power forward or center, but she's been listed at center. They're going to go with a forward or a shooting guard here, especially if Kelsey Mitchell leaves. If Mitchell comes back, I will probably switch this pick to a forward. But if she leaves, I think they go with a shooting guard. And I've got JJ Quinterly out of West Virginia going here at 8. Quinterly, very underrated for West Virginia. Um, she has a 39.5 field goal percentage and 3-point percentage as a senior at West Virginia. A lot of people have Azizi Fudd, the Connecticut shooting guard, in the first round, but Azizi Fudd's only averaging like 8.7 points per game. She's not consistent enough to get in the first round yet. Quinterly's more consistent, but Quinterly does have a second round grade in most NBA mock drafts. But it's the consistency that pushed her into the first round at number 8. Yeah, if you get a shooting guard like Azizi Fudd, who's only averaging 8.7 points per game, that's not going to help Caitlin Clark in year 2. Whereas Quinterly, who's averaging 17 points as a senior at West Virginia, 3.7 assists, 3.3 rebounds, 3.3 steals. If you get a shooting guard that can average 3 steals, that's going to take a lot of pressure off of Clark in more ways than you. I think Sellers is more of a point guard than a shooting guard, but some of Sellers is a combo guard. But if you think Sellers can play the 2 at shooting guard, you could pick her here too. I mean, it just depends on what you're looking for. But I think Quinterly's a good fit for what the Fever want to do at 8 if Mitchell leaves. She's listed as a point guard. She's listed as a point guard in college. And mock draft. She was the point guard. Okay. Yeah, because you already have Elia Boston who can play power forward or center, and you also have Nelissa Smith who can play small forward or power forward. You have Clark at point guard. So those are your three core players. And Kelsey Mitchell is the fourth scorer. If you bring her back and you get Sellers and you move her to small forward and you have Smith play power forward, Boston center, that can work too. It just depends what happens with Kelsey Mitchell. I think that's the big thing the Fever got to look at. Yeah. Yep. Well, Stephanie White is the new head coach of the Indiana Fever. The Connecticut Sun got to the Eastern Conference Finals. They lost to the Connecticut Sun got to the conference finals and they lost in the conference finals to Minnesota. So they fired her, Stephanie White. She was the coach of Connecticut. They were the 3 seed. They got to the conference semifinals and they lost to Minnesota. So they fired her for that. And the Fever picked up Stephanie White. So she's going to have a lot more talent to work with in Indiana versus Connecticut. And I have a feeling she's going to get the Fever to a WNBA Finals. She was an assistant on the Suns 2012 championship team, too. And Tyler Marsh is now the new head coach of the Chicago Sky. He was an assistant coach for the Becky Hammond and the Las Vegas Aces, but Tyler Marsh is now on the Sky. So those are the two WNBA coaching moves that happened this year. Tyler, yeah, but it's going to be interesting to see how Clark and Reese develop with new head coaches. I think that's going to be a really unique dynamic moving forward. And I think White and Marsh are both going to do a better job. White took the Sun to the conference finals, the Final Four in the WNBA, and Marsh worked under Becky Hammond. So I think both of those are great head coaching hires by the Fever and the Sky. Khalil Mullins just got a touchdown, so Michigan just scored a touchdown. Michigan. I'm not going to say Michigan or F Michigan. I'm just going to call them Michigan. Michigan scored a touchdown. Khalil Mullins. So the Wolverines now lead. don't want Michigan to win. I'm sick of Michigan winning. I want Ohio State to win again. I mean, I've had to deal with this for 4 years. It isn't. What happened, what happened to him? Did he get fired? Urban Meyer manhandled Michigan. He was undefeated against Michigan, but then he left Ohio State to go to help for health reasons. Then he went to the Jaguars after a year. If Urban Meyer can beat Michigan, I will gladly welcome him with open arms back to Columbus. Okay, I'm just saying. I don't care if he's good in college and helps Ohio State win. I will gladly welcome him back. But he's a great college coach. He's a great recruiter. So I think Ohio State fumbled at like the 1 yard line. Michigan recovered. That's how Michigan got the touchdown. But back to the WNBA here. We got 4 more picks to go. Okay. Who intercepted him? You know who intercepted? Who got the interception? I okay. I guess I can look up the stats here on Google. I let's see. Is Will Johnson back from his injury? That's kind of what I'd like to see here. Player stats for Michigan: Davis Warren, 5'6". Um, Defense, they don't list the defensive stats on Google, which is crazy because they should. They do it for the NFL. So Google's hypocrites because they list the defensive stats for NFL players, but not college. So Google, you need to fix that. Whoever's running your sports team division, you need to freaking fix that because you're hypocrites if you only list stats for the pros but not college. That's what ESPN did for many years. Mullins had the rushing touchdown, but it's Will Johnson back. No, Colson Loveland and Will Johnson are out. So Michigan's two best players on offense and defense are out with injuries. So this is a game Ohio State should win. Because on paper they're the better team. Ryan Day just can't beat Michigan. But let's get back to the mock draft here. We've got 4 picks left. Michaela Timpson, power forward, Florida State goes to the Storm. I mean, they've got the Seattle Storm have Joelle Lloyd at point guard, Skylar Diggins at shooting guard, Gabby Williams at small forward, Naneka Ogwumike at power forward, and Ezzy McBeggar at center. And they've got Lloyd, Skylar Diggins, and McBeggar under contract. Naneka Ogwumike's a free agent, and Gabby Williams is both is also a free agent. But what I think they will do is if I think they will probably draft a power forward and they will turn things over to their small forward Michaela Timpson because you know No, they will turn things over to they drafted a small forward in the 2023 WNBA draft, Jordan Horston out of Tennessee. They drafted a small forward, but they've been developing her on the bench for 2 years. I think Horston will probably take over at the three, and if Ogwu Mike leaves, Michaela Timpson out of Florida State's a nice replacement for her. Timpson, 20.8 points per game, 13.8 rebounds, 2 assists, 2 steals, 3.6 blocks, 91% free throw percentage. Can't shoot from three, but that is literally the only limitation in her game right now. So, but what do you think of Michaela Timpson? Yeah, improve her 3 point shot, and but she does do a lot very well. Yeah, I know you're a few seconds ahead of me on the games. Yeah, there's a big fight breaking out. All right, so that will Michaela Timpson goes to the Seattle Storm, and the Storm have a good coach. So Storm could be one of these teams next year that surprises a lot of people. But yeah, the Sky are going to get a point guard here. Tihaina Papau of South Carolina, 3 year starter at Oregon. She transferred to South Carolina last year. Best returning starter on South Carolina's team. She could shoot from anywhere. Great passer. She could defend well despite her size at 5 foot 9, 145. So Tihaina Papau to the Chicago Sky at 10 as they own the Connecticut Sun's first round pick. So I think the fight knocked the referee down. Um, so that's yeah. All right. The minutes we've got 2 picks left. But Tihaina Papau is a good addition to the Sky because you'd have Tihaina Papau at point guard, Mitchell at shooting guard if she signs with the Sky, Morrow at small forward, Reese, and then Williams at center with Cardoso for depth. That's a good lineup for Chicago. But yeah, Minnesota at 11 got Cheyenne Sellers, and the Lynx have Courtney Williams at point guard, Kayla McBride at shooting guard, Alana Smith at small forward, Bridget Carlton at power forward, and Nafisa Collier at center. So Minnesota is the only team that has their entire starting five back. So if they get Sellers at 11 and they get their starting five back, they're probably my pick to win the WNBA Finals in 2025. The Lynx have a lot of talent back. They also have Diamond Miller as the backup small forward and Piley as the backup power forward. They have a lot of depth here. I think they're going to get either a point guard or center for depth. I think Sellers, even if there's a lot of people that have Sellers in round two, but I don't think she's going to make it past 11 because we talked about last year how the Lynx needed a point guard. They didn't get it in the draft, and I think they get it here. And I've got Cheyenne Sellers coming off the board of the Lynx at 11. But if the Lynx get Sellers and they've got their entire starting five back, I think it's safe to say the Lynx are the favorite next year, unless the Liberty get a really good point guard at 7. You want to add anything to that, Joey, before we get to the final pick in the mock? All right. Last pick, Aoka Lee, center, Kansas. The Mercury, they do have Tarasi if she comes back. She's might retire. She hasn't made a decision yet. Cooper at shooting guard, Cloud at small forward, Griner at power forward. But you draft Aoka Lee, you get the center to fill out your starting five. And if Tarasi comes back, you have one more shot to win a third title. I mean, this team, they did win 2 championships. They won a championship before Griner was drafted, and they won one after she was drafted. I think if you get Aoka Lee, the Kansas State center, the top center in this draft, you'd have one more year to maybe win a title. But it's contingent on Tarasi returning. If Tarasi does not return, this team is going to be in a bit of a rebuild. I thought they were going to be one of the worst teams in the league last year, but they did make the playoffs as a 7 or 8 seed. So we'll see what happens. But Aoka Lee can shoot from short range or medium range. You can move Griner back from power forward, from center to her natural position at power forward. I think there's a lot there to work with. But Aoka Lee rounds out this top 12. But that's the mock. What do you want to add here? Because I think we pretty much covered everything for today, unless Joey's got some surprise topics. There's not as many stars in 2025 as 2024. It's a deep draft. Don't get me wrong; it's deeper than last year, but the star power that was there in the first round compared to 24 when you had Brink, Reese, just isn't there. It just isn't there. Yeah. Yeah, and that's the thing. Kiki Irafin's listed at number 2. I don't think she goes second overall, but I'm looking at Tankathon's mock. They've got Miles at 3, Cintron at 5, Morrow at 4. Malonga from Asvel is at number 6. Azizi Fudd, who's struggled in terms of points per game, is number 7. An international player goes to Fever at 8. Amor goes 9. Papau at 10. Rory Harmon at 11. And Barker at 12. Barker's another player who's not averaging double-digit points yet. They have Cheyenne Sellers to the Sparks in round 2. They have Sellers falling to round 2, which I think is just dumb. Like, I've seen Sellers tape. You've been telling me about Sellers for a year, 2 years now, and she's listed in round 2 on Tankathon. I don't agree with that. I think Sellers is a round 1 player. I'm with you on that. So, yeah, I mean, Sellers, Lee, Timpson, and Quinterly were 4 players I think we had in round that are consensus round 2 players, but they got pushed up to round 1 because a lot of the players, some of the players, not a lot, but some of the players aren't living up to expectations. I'm not going to name names right now. I'm trying to stay positive, not throw anyone under the bus, but some of the players got some stuff they got improving. So they just got to do that, and we'll wish them the best of luck. But yeah, we've pretty much covered everything today. And yeah, if you want NFL predictions from Joey and myself, go to Utopia Football Insider on the YouTube channel. That is where you will get that information. But yeah, we're gonna wrap up. Maybe we can watch the end of the first half of Ohio State, Michigan, but we're at a good stopping point. My mom wants me to get back to the apartment today. I got to pack up for that after the Ohio State Michigan game. I know we watched all of it last year, but last year's game was just a much better matchup. Whereas this year, Michigan, all they're playing for, I think, is bowl eligibility. I'll look at Michigan's record of Michigan football record. What's their record? Because I think Michigan may have to win this game to make the bowl. Michigan is 6-5. They won last week. So Michigan's in a bowl game even if they lose this. But it's the tradition rights. It's beating Ohio State. And if Ohio State loses this game, Indiana or Penn State would play Oregon, depending on who wins the. Howard's injured. That's interesting. Yeah, I figured he only missed a couple plays. I am gonna end things on talk. Wait, should I end things on talk shoe? Maybe I'll just end things on restream, but we'll still stay on the air on talk shoe because we've covered everything on restream. I'll end things on restream so that the show's not too long, but we'll still be on talk shoe. So if you want to hear Joey and I talk about things for a few more minutes, head over to talk shoe. But I am going to end things on restream here. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. We had 48 members